two schools so that you guys can come up again. So
well, it sounded like if Karen is willing, then
she is.
That's who they
Okay.
would want us to
Sweet. Yeah, she is.
I mean, she did so much work with our MTSS plan.
Yeah, and that's why when they asked me to mentor, I'm like, yeah, I can, but I can help this much. But Karen's holds the RTI.
Okay.
She's
So you
and this she would do this one helps.
And I
Well, so yeah. So and then they wouldn't pay both of us. Like, they wouldn't split it.
I'm old at it.
I had to. We got paid so much money, but
And they don't always.
But so then I just had to turn around and then pay her. I'm like, why wouldn't you pay us both? Because now it'll just come out of our taxes.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
But it wasn't that. It wasn't a ton of money, so I'm not too serious about it.
Well, it was really helpful for us.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
You know, with all this first.
Yeah, and here's the thing, it's so easy for me to miss.
Good morning, everyone here. We have microphones.
So glad to hear that.
We want to make sure that
Yeah, keep that
we
going.
have a small enough group, I think we can hear. It's 9 o'clock, we're going to go ahead and get started. We have a lot of information to share with you today. I'm Becky Donaldson. I'm the Federal Programs and Related State Initiatives Coordinator here at the Utah State Board of Education. We're really excited to welcome you today. And I'd like to go around and do introductions. We have some people here that are very veteran Title I directors, and so I want you to, those of you that are new, you know who those people are, so if you have a question, you can say, oh, I've got this question, I'm going to talk to Nancy.
Yeah, don't talk to
Nancy
me.
will help you. All right, because we want everybody to, and there's not any question that you can ask that is not a worthwhile question. We're happy to respond to your questions at any time over email, by phone. That is what we're here for. And sometimes you just say, I think I know the answer to this is this thing, but I'm not quite sure. Could you just verify? Please reach out to us. We're more than happy to do that. So let's start over here and find out who's here in the room and which LEA you represent. Becky's got a mic just in case. Well, we can take this around. Max, would you be willing to kind of, or maybe we can just pass it around. Let's start right here. If you'll tell us your name and which LEA and.
I'm Renee Edwards. There we go.
For my tenor is Early College High School. I'm the principal. I've been over Title I for the last 4 years, but I still come to the new director meetings.
Thank you, Renee.
Hi, I'm Katina Santoria. I run Guadalupe Charter School, and I'm going to continue to come to the new one, no matter how many years I do it.
Thank you, Katina.
Brian Storrs. I'm at Entheos Academy in Magna, and this is my second year as the director.
Thank you, Brian.
I'm Chuck Foster. I am director for the Title VI programs here at USB.
Chuck keeps telling me he's going to retire one of these days. Like, no, you're not.
Hi, I'm Tammy Long, and I'm a compliance manager for Title I.
J.R. Jones, Emory County School District, new elementary supervisor, Title I and other programs.
Welcome, JR.
My name is Val Murdoch, and I do Title I programmatic monitoring.
Hi, I'm Stacy Phillips. I was the director at Voyage for the past 7 years, and this week I started as the new ed specialist at Academica West.
Oh, great. Thank you.
April Olson, Voyage Academy, Title I Ed Assessment Director.
Robin Clement, Cache County School District, Title I, and like the rest, I'm just here because we always learn new stuff.
Paula Hall, Cache County School District.
Thank you.
Dawn Sorensen, I'm with Meagle School District, Title I.
Peggy Horrocks, I'm the Title I coordinator for Washington County School District.
Sarah Sorensen from American Leadership Academy in Spanish Fork, and I am the new Title
Jana Richards, Summit Academy, mostly instructional coach, mentoring, new teacher trainer, et cetera, and I just found out that I'm the Title I director as well. So please help me.
I'm Nancy Ward, and I'm with Jordan School District, and I have been coming to this meeting for years, but I always learn something new, so it's good. And you're right, there's no dumb questions. I still ask all kinds of questions.
I'm Tracy Evans, Park City School District, and I'm trying to have the best seat in the room.
Jennifer Lee, I'm with CSO's Academy. My first year as Title I director, also teacher mentor and STEAM teacher. Thank you.
I'm Tamala Johnson from Moab Grant County, and I am the Title I coordinator at the elementary school.
I'm Himal Kato. I'm the Dean of Students at the Academy for Math, Engineering, and Science, and I'm not the Title I director. But in our positions, we have to know everything and share the load.
Hi, good morning. I'm Kelly Haggett. I'm from Utah Connections Academy, and I'm the assistant principal.
Sandra Grant, excuse me, I do fiscal compliance.
At the computers, I am Becky Johnson's secretary. I'm the evil Becky, but I think it's my best to help everyone out. I'm also monitoring the online portion of the meeting.
Renee Medina, I'm also one of the assistants for the Title I programs. I also keep the contact information, so if you are new this year, let me know so that we can get your emails so you get all of our junk we sent you. Thank you.
Deb's trying to hide back here. I'm Max Lang, USB professional microphone passer.
You do a great job, Max. You look so official and remind me of Phil Donahue.
Goodness, I'm looking older than I thought.
No, I didn't say you look like Phil Donahue. I said you reminded me of Phil Donahue. Some of you are like, who's Phil Donahue? We don't know who that is. I just came from a really wonderful online coaching session. So I'm going to talk to you for just like 1 second about this. I usually don't like promote things, but this has really made a difference to me. Some of us here, leadership about a year ago went through a process called productivity coaching, and it's through Microsoft. And so those of us that were coordinators were just like, we can't control our email, our files, it's just like, I was dragging my computer home at night, sitting there with my computer on my lap at night trying to go through emails and clear out things and take care of things on to-do lists. I had Post-it notes stuck all over on my computer monitor, on my desk. I had electronic Post-it notes, which I'd never then remember to look at. I had things in notebooks. So what this productivity coach has taught me is how to wrangle all of that stuff. So if you want to give yourself a gift this year, if you use Microsoft products, I would recommend it. And my coach's name is Bob Andrus, and I just barely got off the line. I've been meeting with him for 10 Fridays at 7:30 in the morning until 9. He's located in Cincinnati, but he's one of their top people. He has changed my life. Like every day, my inbox is empty. And he taught me how to put tasks. So before I was putting all this stuff on my Outlook calendar saying, talk to Max and Leslie about this. He said, why is that on your calendar? That should just be a task over here. I mean, it's just amazing. So like I said, I typically would not ever come and promote any kind of a product or anything like that, but I know how busy all of you are. So if you want to give yourself a gift, it's a 10-session, one-on-one over Zoom. And so you log in, you connect with your coach, whoever that is, over Zoom. You share your computer screen with them, and they walk you through step by step. And then Bob every week gives me homework assignments, and I make sure those assignments are done. And he said, you know, sometimes they work with clients that don't follow through and they don't do the homework and they don't get through as much content. So I only have 2 sessions left, and I'm going to cry when Bob goes away. But he said if I get a new computer, he's also shown me how to set all the same things up on my phone. And so he said, if you get a new computer, if you get a new phone, even if your sessions are done, you email me and I will walk you through on making sure everything is set up again the way it should be. So give yourself a gift. It's really well worth it. So we're excited that you're here today. We're going to kind of cover some of the Title I Basic 101. We have our next meeting on September 18th for all of our Title I directors, and we'll go into more depth on some of these topics at that point in time. I always start these meetings off by referring back to what Title I is, why we have it, what is the purpose, because I think we need to always keep that in mind. So we're talking about providing supplemental federal funding to support students who are disadvantaged in some way. Students who are coming from high poverty situations, students who are experiencing homelessness, students who have families that are involved in migratory agricultural work, students who are neglected or delinquent, that maybe are involved with youth in custody kinds of programs that are court ordered, services for students who are English learners. All of those programs are part of the Every Student Succeeds Act. The Every Student Succeeds Act has roots that go back to 1965 to the Elementary Secondary Education Act. It was signed into law by President Lyndon Johnson. It was part of that administration's war on poverty, which we have not won, unfortunately. Part of the civil rights movement. So it has its roots in some important work that took place in the 90s. President Johnson started his career as a teacher in a very high poverty school right on the border of Texas and Mexico. And the poverty that these children were living in and the issues that poverty created for them really got to his heart. So he was writing home to his mother and his father saying, you need to send me money. I've got to buy food for these kids. I need to buy shoes. These kids need things. So, and he had this beloved first grade teacher that he had as a child that touched his life in such a way. So that was one of the reasons why he was so adamant about passing this legislation. And when he signed that into law in 1965, he went back to the town, to the school where he had attended first grade and had his first grade teacher understood that, you know, what a difference poverty makes in children's lives, and that we need to do things that we have control over to help them. So it's improving the academic achievement of the disadvantaged, and then Title I in and of itself is to provide all children with a significant opportunity to receive a fair, equitable, and high-quality education to close achievement gaps. So it's the largest federally funded education program in the nation. It's funded at a higher level than IDEA is for special education. And we have millions of students across the country that are participating in programs in schools that are eligible. So Title I includes Title I Part A, which we're discussing today. That's the overall program. Title I 1003A is the school improvement funding through Title I. Title I Part C is education for migrant students, and Part D is for students who are neglected and delinquent. And then, of course, as ESSA, there's Title II, Title III, Title 4A, and 4B, and 5B, and Dr. Foster works with American Indian Education, which is Title VI. The McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Act is Title 7B. So all within that ESSA law are these programs to serve students who are disadvantaged. Utah gets about $81 million. That's what we'll be receiving for state fiscal year 20. The majority of that money flows out to local education agencies to serve schools that have poverty rates that qualify them to receive Title I funding. These are the purposes. And again, some of it is right in that purpose that comes right out of the law. So helping kids achieve academically, closing gaps, building teacher capacity through high quality professional learning opportunities that take into account adult learning theory. Parent engagement is a huge component throughout all of the title programs. And then providing a well-rounded education for all students. Yes, Katina.
When you talk about the percentage, like the poverty rate, is there a poverty rate that, for example, that's generalized in the state? I know with the economy of the state, it changes. Is there one that's different this year than it was last year?
That's a really good question. Katina's asking about what the poverty rate is that establishes this. Well, at the federal level, the federal U.S. Department of Education sends funding out to each of the states and the territories, and that is not based on free and reduced price meals, which is what you probably use within your LEA to determine the poverty levels of your various schools. The poverty level that the feds use to determine how much money a state is going to receive is based on United States Census Bureau poverty information. And they figure that on the number of children residing in the state, number and percentage of children ages 5 to 17, those are considered school-age children. The number of those children ages 5 to 17 that are living in poverty based on the federal definition. And there's always a 2-year lag in that census poverty data. So for example, for federal fiscal year 19, which is state fiscal year 20, it would be based on the United States Census Bureau data from 2017. There's always a 2-year lag. So that's why this upcoming census, the 2020 census, is critically important. Because that's going to determine education funding, funding for all kinds of other programs across the nation. So making sure that that census data is accurate and that families are located and have an opportunity to reply to that census data is really critical. Because that can make a huge difference for the next 10 years of what kinds of funding we get in our state. On August 2nd, the President signed the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2019 because it's federal fiscal year 2019. The House of Representatives has put together their budget proposals. We've seen that recently, and they proposed increases to pretty much across the board for all of the education programs. The Senate has not yet put their budget proposal together. And until the Senate does their work, then they have to come up with the Compromise Appropriations Act, which then has to go back to the President's desk to sign. And that will establish funding levels for federal fiscal year 2020, which will be our state fiscal year 2021, and federal fiscal year 2021, which will then be our state fiscal year 2022. Okay, so the President and the House have agreed that they need to raise those budget caps. The Senate, we're not sure what they're going to do, but unless those budget caps are raised, then funding will be cut. And we talked about that at our spring meeting, that we're facing that fiscal cliff for federal fiscal year 2020, which is next school year, if Congress doesn't agree to raise those budget caps. So we'll keep you posted on that. As we get more information, we'll send things out to you so that you're aware of that. One of the new provisions in the Every Student Succeeds Act is the requirement that LEAs in schools implement practices, strategies, programs that are supported by evidence. And we'll look at those evidence levels in just a minute. Okay, and that applies to school improvement. We cannot issue Title I school improvement funding to schools in improvement status unless in their plans they have included evidence-based strategies and practices that meet the top 3 levels of evidence that Congress defined. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But another way that we can increase student achievement is looking at extended learning opportunities for students. So things like summer school, making sure more students have access to extended day or full day kindergarten. Preschool programs can be provided through Title I funding. After school programming. So let's talk about some of the requirements here for a minute.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
On the summer school program, is that credit recovery, or are we talking in general summer school?
Well, for high school students, it might be credit recovery, right? Helping to make sure kids are going to get the credits they need to graduate. But in an elementary school, it could be providing summer school for students that are at risk of, not meeting their reading proficiency levels or math. It's based really on the needs of the students at that particular school. So whatever your needs are in your site-specific context.
But enrichment might be considered something
Enrichment,
else
it can
for
also
summer.
pay for enrichment because it really emphasizes well-rounded education.
Okay.
So
Great. Thank you.
thank you for asking. That's an excellent question. So looking at requirements, I want you to emblazon this in your brain, and that is the plan rules everything. So that means the plan that the LEA has for what they're going to do with Title I. And if you are a school district or a charter organization that has multiple campuses, it also rules what that school does. The school has to have a plan. So, and those plans have to be based on the needs of the kids at that particular school. No 2 schools are the same. Every school has a unique context, a unique school community. So you have to know what the needs of that school are, what are the needs of the students, what are the needs of parents in the community, what are the needs of educators in that building, and then you build a plan based on those needs. Then, after you have a plan, you use your funds to fund that plan. You do not get funds and then say, oh, we won the lottery, we've got $500,000 in Title I funds. How could we spend that? So Principal Johnson says, oh, I'm going to send all 40 of my teachers to Anaheim, California to this workshop. I'm going to pay for their airfare and their hotels and all their meals, and they might sneak off and go to Disneyland, and not really be in the sessions. But I think it was a good use of money to send that entire staff to Anaheim. You look at those needs, you build that plan, and then you take those dollars and you fund that, right? You're going to build a house, you have a blueprint. And you have to get bids on who's going to dig the foundation and do the concrete, who's going to come in and frame it. What are you going to put on the outside? Is it going to be brick, stucco, whatever it's going to be? You have to get bids from contractors. What about windows? What about doors? You have a plan for that house and you have to stick within, then you budget your money that you have available to build that home. And you can't go like, oh, well, I want this $100,000 kitchen. Well, you really don't have, you don't have $100,000 for that kitchen. So you've got to base, what are your needs and how much money can you put toward that thing, right? So the plan always rules everything.
Sorry, clarifying question.
Yeah.
If we're doing a needs assessment and a school improvement plan, it's not just Title I coming into it. You've got state money, you've got special ed money, you have other title money. Are we okay to call that our plan and then report how we're using our Title I money for that plan?
Yes.
Or do we need a specific, because it seems kind of redundant to do the same needs assessment, but you're only serving a certain piece.
Yeah, thank you. And again, excellent questions. We really advise you to have a plan, right? And your plan is, how do we help these students that are coming to this school achieve at a higher level? How do we make sure those kids are getting what they need? And yes, you're going to have Title I money, you're going to have state money, you're going to have maybe some money coming in for special ed services, you have, your teacher student success plan, you have your trust lands plan. There really needs to be a plan. And then you look at all of your funds and you leverage those funds to meet those needs, right? If we have 20 different plans, we can't really pay attention to any of them at any level of, depth. So you have those overall arching goals. What do we want for these children? And then you leverage your funding to go that direction. Again, if things are not in that plan and then you submit reimbursement claims, Tammy is going to be auditing Title I starting with fiscal year 20. Sandy is still looking at fiscal year 18 and 19 for Title I. They're going to say, okay, I want documentation, and then say, so you sent these teachers to Anaheim? Why? Right? They're going to deem you on that. So remember, the annual plan rules, both at the LEA level and at the school level. And those plans need to be developed with stakeholder input, and that means really genuine input. So when we go out and we do on-site monitoring, we meet with a focus group of parents, and one of the questions we ask them is, what was your involvement and knowledge of this LEA's plan for using their Title I money? And it's really nice when parents say, oh yes, they held a meeting, we were invited to that meeting, we had multiple opportunities, they sent out surveys, we know that they're listening to us, they're hearing us, our voices are represented in the plan. We ask teachers, what is your involvement in the creation of this plan? We ask students, what's happening in the school. The kids really tell you what's going on. You need to make sure that these people are all involved in that plan. It can't be someone sitting at a district level or the charter administration level writing this plan up with no one else having any input into it. And again, she brought up the question about how do we coordinate that with other things? Well, you really need to coordinate with the other title programs. The McKinney-Vento, it's its own separate education act, but as I said, it's also Title 7B of the Every Student Succeeds Act. We have all these other things, the Perkins CTE Act, the special education laws, Head Start, Adult Ed. Then you have state and local funds as well. You need to make sure all of that's coordinated. So these are some things you need to talk to us about in your plan. First of all, how are you going to use those Title I funds to ensure that students who are educationally and economically disadvantaged are not taught at a greater level by teachers who are either inexperienced or teaching, out of field than students in your other schools that are not Title I? You have to tell us what poverty criteria you use to determine which schools are receiving Title I. And many LEAs use their child nutrition data. Sometimes there are communities where certain schools have a large percentage of students who have families that are receiving TANF money, temporary assistance for needy families, or they're receiving SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Act program, food stamps, they used to be called, or other kinds of things. And so that whole school can be certified as a community eligibility program, which basically means 100% of those children are then deemed to be, students who are economically disadvantaged. But if you have a number of schools and you're going to identify one or two schools under that provision, it impacts how you calculate what your Title I percentage is for the other schools. If you have students that are neglected or delinquent students, you need to talk about how you're going to incorporate services for those students, how you're going to make sure that homeless students receive the services that they're entitled to. And again, parent engagement is one of the provisions in the Every Student Succeeds Act that requires programs to be based on evidence. So we're moving beyond just having a bake sale, like we did maybe when my children were young, or having the traditional family literacy night in the fall, and then maybe having a family math night in the spring. That might be a form of parent involvement, but it's not really meaningful parent engagement that's going to help me as a parent learn about what I can be doing at home to support my children's learning. What can I do at home to make sure that my children are going to be, progressing in reading, in math, in other areas? You have to think about how you're going to integrate early education programs, and how are you going to make sure that children coming out of a pre-K program, whether that's offered through the district with Title I funds or through other funding, or children maybe are attending a Head Start program or other kinds of pre-K programs, how do you ensure that they are going to be transitioned effectively into kindergarten and first grade? Some schools operate a targeted assistance model, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that in a minute. But in those schools, they have to identify the students that are most academically at risk. Doesn't matter what the student's poverty level might be. They're the students most academically at risk, and then the school has to explain what services they're going to provide to that group of students. Again, looking at transitions, how do we ensure that students transition successfully from elementary school to middle school, from middle school into high school? We lose children at those junctures. I know years ago when my children had to transition from elementary school into middle school, it was like a black hole for my son. Very introverted student, very bright, but he just kind of fell through the cracks, and it was kind of a scary time, and we had to really advocate for him. So making sure kids are transitioning successfully. And then again, looking at, disciplinary practices, that we're not overly targeting specific students. So it's quite an involved thing to participate in Title I. These are requirements for parent engagement. If your LEA receives $500,000 or more in Title I money on an annual basis, you have to set aside at least 1% of that money for parent engagement activities. You need to have a school parent engagement policy and a school parent compact. Val Murdoch will talk later this morning, and she's collects information, has examples, and is willing to help you if you need to revise those documents. School principals need to hold an annual Title I meeting each year. It can be part of back to school open house or whatever function that they might be doing. And they have to say to parents, we are a Title I school, we receive X amount of money, and this is what we're using those funds for, to support your children. There's a parent's right to know requirement, and I think I have another slide that goes into depth a little bit more about that. And then again, parent engagement needs to be evidence-based. Parents need access to their students' assessment and evaluation data. If a school is in improvement status, parents need to be notified on an annual basis. Our school has been identified for state school turnaround, or our school has been identified for comprehensive support and improvement, or targeted support and improvement for these specific reasons. This will be an opportunity for us to look at what we're doing, make adjustments, and improve. So I would always approach it in a positive way, that it's an opportunity to learn and to grow and to improve what's happening for kids. So if a parent comes into the school and asks about the qualifications of a specific teacher that their child has, the school needs to provide that when it's requested. If students are going to be taught for 4 or more weeks by a long-term substitute who does not meet state licensure requirements, parents need to be notified of that. Yes.
Becky, on the qualifications, can you help me understand, is that like, do they have a teaching license? How many years they've been teaching? Are they highly effective? What do we consider
What it says in the Every Student Succeeds Act is that teachers have to meet whatever that individual state's licensing requirements are. Okay, under No Child Left Behind, it talked about highly qualified teachers, which meant, you know, if I'm going to teach a certain subject in high school, I have to have a minor in that, or a major, or an endorsement. Now it's just said whatever the state's licensing requirements are, then the teacher is highly qualified.
I just wanted to share, I have the teachers do that at back to school night, so they do their little welcome sheets or information, and that's when they list out everything. So that when they go home, parents go home with their little packet of who my teacher is, all of that. It has all that information, so they can answer questions.
That's a great idea, Katina. Then, yeah, there's no question. Everybody knows I'm Mrs. Donaldson. These are my qualifications. Yes, thank you.
So the state licensing requirements are changing right now. Charter school, obviously. We have a lot of teachers who are in the then ARL, now. They're being put under the so they're meeting a requirement to be qualified. Do we just communicate that like you're saying on a back to school night, or I haven't seen anything where we're bannering everybody's whatevers, you know?
So I had 2 years ago. I had 1 last year. And what basically we just did is explain that they are an ARL through and that it is a qualified program through the state. That was sufficient. I didn't have any parent ask any more about that or anything.
Well, I mean, we hired them for a reason, so we feel pretty good about their ability to become highly qualified.
Yes. So, and again, I talked about, you know, if the school is in improvement, you send that notification home every year until the school exits improvement status. Yes.
So my question is about that. So are there specific requirements for that notification? Is it need to be written or announced, or?
It should be a written notification. Max is going to be talking about school improvement right after I finish my slides. We do have a handbook, and it has some sample letters in that handbook that you're free to use, or you can, make your own, but it should be in writing. So what is a Title I school? As I talked about a minute ago, there's basically two types: school-wide Title I schools and targeted assistance Title I schools. So let's talk about those. First of all, what makes a school eligible to receive Title I funding? A school has to have a poverty rate of at least 35% to receive Title I funds. This has changed dramatically over the years because back in the 1960s, when this law was first enacted, it was a pretty high bar. It was like 60% poverty, 75% I think at one time. Then they lowered it to 60%. And over the years, they've lowered it. For charter schools, the school must have at least 10 students who are from low-income families under that federal definition. And as I said, in Utah, low-income students are typically identified through the child nutrition data.
Back to that. So we have targeted school. And we've just divided up between two elementaries. One of them meets that threshold. The other one is the second highest poverty rate, but they aren't 35%. Should we not be giving money to that school? I think they're at 27 or 28.
Probably not.
Okay. But that's...
You can grandfather them in for 1 year if you need to, Tracy. Okay. So a school is eligible again. So those are the criteria. And then this is what happens next. If you're a school district or a charter LEA that has multiple campuses, you have to do what is called ranking and serving. So first of all, you rank order your schools, and this will be in the Utah Grants Management System. That will be a form. So you will list your schools in rank order from the highest poverty school in the LEA to the lowest poverty school. So you list all of them, even the ones that you're not going to provide Title I funds to. If you have schools that have 75% poverty or higher, you must serve those schools. Okay? Those schools are categorically eligible. You can't withhold funding regardless of what grade span they serve. So even if it's a high school and they have 75% poverty or higher, you have to serve that high school. So once you've looked to see if you have any schools in that category, then again, you've ranked them. You can rank them in district order, or you can then look at grade span. So a lot of LEAs choose to target their Title I funding at the elementary school level. So then you say, okay, we're going to have Apple Tree Elementary has 60% poverty, and then the next school right under that is Pear Tree Middle School, and it has 58% poverty. You can skip Middle Tree Middle School. If you're going to target elementary schools, you can skip that school. And then you go down, the next elementary might be Cherry Tree Lane Elementary. And that one has 56 poverty, so you're going to serve that school. Okay, so once you've served the ones with 75% or higher, you can then go to a grade span ranking, and you can skip certain grade spans if you choose to focus on a specific grade. So you can provide Title I services to schools with a poverty rate of 35% or higher, as long as you have enough funding to spread your funding that far. So I'll give you an example. Mitch Nurden is the Title I director in Granite School District. They have a lot of schools, and they have a lot of poverty over on the west side of the valley. So what they do, they only use their free lunch data. They don't even look at the free and reduced. They look only at free. And they decided a couple years ago to cut that off at the 60% mark. So every year, Mitch allocates his funding to those schools that are above 60%. And then they have a whole lot of other schools that are still above 35%. But he said, I can't spread that Title I funding thin enough to get to all those schools, or schools would get such a small amount of money, it wouldn't make any difference. Okay, so that's the decision that they made. So it varies quite a bit from LEA to LEA. Do you have a question, Deb?
So on the ones that are community eligible and they move them to 100%,
Yes.
would you consider those 100% free if you were? You have to go back and look at kids that made them 100% eligible.
Well, there's a lot of guidance around community eligibility. We can talk more and give you that guidance and then sit down and look at it individually. Deb. It's complicated. So let's look at this for a minute. Here's the up-and-coming school district. The district's average poverty rate is 47.3%. So they don't have any schools that were 75% or higher, right? And they've only listed elementary schools here. So they've got them rank ordered by poverty, the number of students that come from low-income families, and then they determined how much money per student, this is called your per pupil allocation, the PPA, in the Utah grant system. So Adams Elementary is their highest poverty school. 165 of those children come from high poverty homes. They're going to allocate $650 per student. So Adams Elementary's Title I allocation will be $107,250. Then they have a kind of a gap here to Butler Elementary. They reduce this. Butler has more children, so they have a lower per pupil allocation, but they actually get more money because there are more children generating that share. And then they're going to serve Cliffside at $500 per pupil. Drake Elementary and Everett Elementary don't meet the poverty threshold, so they aren't going to provide Title I money to those two schools. Okay, but let's say that last year Drake Elementary had 36% poverty, and they were serving them as a targeted assistance school. Then the district could say, okay, last year they had poverty that was high enough to receive funds. This year they've dropped. We're going to grandfather them in for 1 year and see what happens. You know, maybe there were some kids that didn't return the paperwork. Maybe there's, a change in neighborhoods or whatever. They're going to give it a year to see what happens the following year. So then the next year, if Drake Elementary is still below that threshold, then they're going to say, okay, Drake Elementary, we're sorry, but you no longer qualify for Title I funding. Question? Okay, a few years ago, we had some LEAs as we were looking at their applications that were then in the Utah Consolidated application. This year, everything is in the Utah grant system. UCA is no longer a thing. We had some LEAs that no matter what the school was, no matter the level of poverty, they were giving every school the same per pupil allocation. And they were just, going down and figuring out, okay, we have this many schools, we're going to divide that by, the number of kids, and okay, we're going to give $1,400. So they've got mostly school-wide schools. This school right here is a junior high school. You can see they have a larger number of students because it's a larger school. It's a junior high school. So that school's a targeted assistance school, but it's getting a big chunk of Title I money, right? Close to $1 million. Now, other LEAs were being a little bit more, they were thinking about it more through an equity lens, okay? So they're saying, okay, this elementary right here, their poverty rate's 95%. Whoa, that's high. That's 20% higher than that 75% mandatory must receive Title I money. So they said, okay, we're gonna give this school 1,000, and then they went down, here's that 75% mark. So they said, these are our highest poverty schools. We're going to give them a larger per pupil allocation. Then they have schools that the poverty starts dropping. So then they say, okay, these two schools are fairly similar. We'll drop this to 800. And then we have another band here that's, you know, a little bit less. We'll drop it down again. So they're trying to look at it more through an equity lens, not treating every school the same. Because we would see districts where they'd have a school with 90% poverty. This is an actual example from an LEA in Utah. They had schools clear up here, and then they were serving down to here at the same, that doesn't make any sense. A school with 90% or higher poverty is a different kind of community than a school with 40 or 45% poverty, right? So, two types of programs. If a school has 40% or higher poverty, they are eligible to operate a school-wide Title I program. And in a school-wide program, all students are considered eligible for Title I services, even those students that are not from low-income families. Every student's considered eligible. And so the things that Title I funds are providing, then all students can benefit from that. So if the school is hiring a reading specialist or an interventionist, that teacher can work with any student in the school. Right? All students are eligible. If they decide they need more books in their school library, all students have access and can benefit from those books in the library, okay? But if you're a targeted assistance school, this is for schools below 40% poverty. The school has to use multiple types of assessment data, and they have to identify the students in the school that are most academically at risk. It does not matter whether that student is from a low-income family or not. So the children from low-income families generate funding to that school. They make the school eligible. They may not be the students that are served. So you identify those students who are most academically at risk, and you kind of rank those kids, and you have a list. You determine how many of those children you can serve with your Title I services. Okay, so you're providing additional support for those kids, reading, math, whatever it happens to be. And maybe some of those children then make a lot of progress. You can exit those children out, then you pull in the next student on the list, and that student receives service. If you're doing this kind of a program, schools need to make sure they can document how they identified those kids and what services are being provided. So they can't just say, we're a targeted assistance school and we're going to run an after-school program using our Title I money, and we just let any kid that wants to come to after-school programming come. It's a different level of documentation that you have to maintain. Are there questions about those two types of schools? Yes.
Do we have flexibility in how we define academically at risk? Because if you're looking at, state test scores, that's not always applicable for high school.
Yeah, so you look at a number of different things. So you can use state test scores as one thing, but you probably have school level data.
Right.
You have data that teachers say, I've been observing this child as I've worked with this student. The student I know is really struggling in this particular area. So you have a variety of ways of determining this child really is at risk academically. And it might be the student that comes from the family in the school that's the highest income. It doesn't matter. Let's talk a little bit about targeted assistance a little bit more. So again, if schools have less than 40% poverty, or if it is a school that is getting Title I money for the first time, they have to operate a targeted assistance program. So sometimes LEAs are building new schools, so they open a brand new school and they say, we know this school is going to qualify for Title I. Well, that first year, that school has to be targeted assistance while they do a needs assessment and work on developing their school-wide plan. Okay? And again, it's only for supplementary services for kids that are eligible. And again, it's not eligible by income level, it's eligible based on academic need. And again, you prioritize those students and you make sure that those are the students that are receiving services. So here are some things that would qualify a student. So the kids that are failing or they're at risk of failing the state academic standards. Kids that attended Head Start are categorically eligible. Or if they attended a preschool that you funded out of Title I money because they met certain criteria. Students who are eligible to receive services under migrant education are categorically eligible for Title I services. The same for students that are neglected or delinquent. Okay, they're categorically eligible. Any student who is in a situation where they're experiencing homelessness is eligible, and any students in foster care. So these kids are categorically eligible to receive Title I services in a targeted assistance school. Questions about that? So you're going to design a program that will meet the needs of those students you've identified. You need to minimize the amount of time students are pulled out of their regular Tier 1 core instruction. You don't want to have a paraeducator coming into the student's Tier 1 math classroom and pulling that student out to do tutoring. That student needs to be in their Tier 1. This has to be in addition to that, as supplemental. There's a targeted assistance checklist that's on our website. We'll show you where that is. Some LEAs, this doesn't apply to charter LEAs, but regular school district LEAs have to set aside some money to serve students that are attending private schools but would be attending that district's Title I, one of the Title I schools in a district, if they went to their own neighborhood school. Their parent is choosing to have them attend a private school. Then you have to set aside some money to provide services to those kids in that private school. You don't send money to the private school, but you provide services. If a private school is participating in the Equitable Services provision, they cannot operate a school-wide school. They can only operate a targeted assistance school. And again, it applies to those kids that are the most academically at risk. Okay, we get a lot of questions about staffing qualifications. We've had a couple of questions this morning. So right now, under the Every Student Succeeds Act, teachers have to meet the state licensing requirements. We know those have been evolving and they're going to be changing. They're going to be implemented soon. Paraeducators, this standard did not change from NCLB. It's the same. So paraeducators that are hired in targeted assistance schools and they are paid with Title I money must have a high school diploma plus at least one of these. So a high school diploma plus an associate's degree, or this number of hours of college credit, or they have a high school diploma and they have passed the Praxis Parapro exam or some other similar exam that's qualified. If you hire paraeducators in a targeted assistance school and you're not paying them with Title I money, then this doesn't apply. But if they're paid with Title I money, they have to meet those requirements. Questions?
I had a question.
Yes.
Will you just clarify which praxis test the teachers have to take to qualify?
I don't know the exact answer to that, Nancy, but we can research it with our teacher licensing. I know there's various. I'm not really sure.
Depend on what they do.
Well, yeah, because there's 3 praxis. The one to even get into any education program, one that's content, and one that after you've gotten in and the praxis 2, which is going away.
Okay. Yeah, there've been a lot of changes that will be occurring, so we can always check in with Travis Rawlings, who over that section. All right, now let's talk about school-wide Title I schools. Okay, the poverty threshold here is 40%. And as I said, you can grandfather schools in for 1 year if they, they were 40% or higher 1 year, and then they dip down a little bit the next year. And you think, well, maybe that was a fluke, and next year they're going to be okay. You can grandfather them in. Title I school-wide schools have to have a plan. As I said, that plan drives everything. And it's based on a needs assessment. They have to have school-wide reform strategies. At this point, there's more flexibility in how the funds are used because they can upgrade the entire educational program at the school, and all students are eligible for services. We have a school-wide planning template, and there's also guidance from the Department of Education that we can make sure that you have access to. So there are 4 required components to these school-wide plans. They have to be based on a needs assessment. They have to have school-wide reform strategies, activities to ensure students who are academically at risk are going to be able to master the state academic standards, and then coordination of funding. And we have those previous slides about all the different funding you should consider. If you're designating a new Title I school as a school-wide school, they've been open at least a year, they've gone through that process to do the needs assessment and a plan, you have to submit those to us that first year. And when on-site monitoring visits occur, we will review the school-wide plans for any schools we're going to be visiting. Then we'll come out and we'll be asking questions about that plan and how students are doing, how the money's being used, what results they're getting to use.
Just a quick question. Number 2, it says school-wide reform strategies. Is that also like the school improvement plan? Is that what is meant there, or
yes,
is that separate?
It's all part of that. Okay. And again, wherever you can fit evidence base in, that really makes a difference. So again, teachers pass the state licensing requirements. The paraeducators working in school-wide, it's the same thing, but in a school-wide school, every paraeducator that has any sort of instructional interaction with kids have to meet those requirements. We're going to talk about some exceptions in just a minute, and they have to do their work under the supervision of a qualified teacher. Oh, that says slide 29. All right, here's slide 30. So paraprofessionals always have to have a high school diploma, but if a paraprofessional does only these things, they don't have to meet one of those other requirements. So if all that paraeducator does is work with parent engagement activities, they're a parent engagement liaison, they just need a high school diploma if that's all they do. If they are hired to provide translation services for parents, that's all they need is a high school diploma. Or if they are working with students with disabilities and they're just providing personal assistance and personal care, they don't have to meet the requirement. So the requirements under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which funds special ed, their requirements are different than Title I. And then we get these questions all the time. But if it's a paraeducator that has any sort of instructional interaction with that child, whether it's tutoring, whatever it happens to be, they have to meet all those other criteria. Yes.
What if they're doing testing? Is that considered instructional?
That playground assistant.
Playground assistant, I would say no, probably not. Any other questions about that? You do get lots of questions, so if you're not sure on a particular situation, ask us. Robin?
Do other groups know that, like SPED and stuff? I know we're always trying to tell them, and they always act so surprised, and so, anyway. Are they getting the messages from their?
I think our special education department is clear on this, because they weren't clear before either. And their standard is different. They don't have to meet the same standard. So I think we've tried to communicate enough with them, and
And it's just Title I schools, so I know one thing we've done is we've said, well, the praxis is difficult for some of those to pass. It's like, well, we can move you to this non-Title I school. So you won't lose your job, but we will have to move.
And I know some LEAs, we've talked to some LEAs, and they said they just made that a standard, that any paraeducator they hire, they want them to meet that highly qualified qualification. And then they can do whatever you need them to do, and there won't be a question. But again, if we're coming out and monitoring or doing an audit, and Tammy or Sandy asks for time and effort documentation for who's being paid, and you are paying paraeducators who aren't qualified, that's going to get you an audit finding.
So it's only if they're paid out of Title I, they have to be.
No. If it's a targeted assistance school, only if they're paid. If they're in a school-wide school, they all have to meet the requirements. Unless they do things like this that are not instructional. Okay? That's the clarification. Any other questions about paraeducators? Yeah, that's a frequent question. And we even have our licensing department. People will call them, and then they'll call us and say, what's the deal here? Here are some things that a paraeducator can do in a Title I school. Like I said, some of these, they wouldn't really need to be this one. This one, if that's all they're doing, they don't need to meet the requirements. School. Another part of your school-wide plan is addressing professional learning activities. That should always be a part of your plan at the LEA and the school level. In Utah, we've adopted the Utah Professional Learning Standards. The first 7 of these come from Learning Forward standards. And then in Utah, they added technology. So this is actually in state code and board rule that we follow those standards. And this is on our website. We can show you where to locate that as well. It's on effective teachers and leaders, I think is the section. Improving student achievement. That's really what Title I's about. So again, making sure that kids are receiving Tier 1 instruction from a qualified teacher who is licensed by the state. Using assessment data, providing targeted interventions for students that need additional help. Enrichment for those students that need, additional. So if you're in a high school and you want to provide additional AP classes or IB courses or those kind of things, that's something that you can do. Reviewing the academic progress each year, which I'm sure all of you do. Talk just for a minute about the evidence-based requirements in ESSA. We've all known about this pendulum, right? That's in education all the time, and we just kind of let me off. I'm tired. I want to get off. Education has not been a field that has really been responsive to evidence, like some other fields like science and medicine and technology, and some businesses that are really driven by what does the data say and how are we going to improve. We tend to do things by, well, this teacher from this other school said this was a really neat thing, or I saw this idea on Pinterest, I thought it was really cute, or it's a tradition because I've taught this way for 30 years and I've always done it this way and I like it, it makes me happy, or politics are always shifting back and forth, right? So teachers are always caught up in this, and unfortunately kids are kind of the victims of this. So we've got to get off there. So these are the levels of evidence that are in ESSA. So level 1 is considered strong evidence. Those are research studies that use an experimental design. You have a group that's going to receive the treatment, and you have a group that is not receiving the treatment. And you're trying to figure out, does the treatment have, what effect does the treatment have on the group that got it compared to this other group that got a placebo or something different? You're trying to tease that out. It's hard to get that kind of research in education, right? Because we're dealing with human beings. Level 2 is moderate evidence. Those are quasi-experimental studies. And then level 3 are correlational studies. So for school improvement money, we're told we have to have, schools need to select things in these top 3 tiers. Level 4 means there's some research findings that are coming out. They seem positive, but there needs to be more research done in order to really move it into one of those other levels. So a question has come up recently, and that is about effect sizes. So we've had schools that have been submitting improvement plans, and they've been saying, John Hattie says this particular thing has an effect size of 1.34, therefore that's a level 1. Well, no, it isn't. Okay, a meta-analysis is actually a statistical process. It's a study of a group of studies. Let's say I am researching from a reading comprehension thing, like reciprocal teaching. So I have all these studies, right? I have a study that Deb Bushik did in 1986. I have a study Katina did in 1992. I have a study that Brian did in 2000. I have a study that Robin did in 2008. Max did a study in 2011. So I gather all of those studies that people did on reciprocal teaching. Each of those studies becomes a subject in my research. Then I do this statistical analysis and I come up with an average or mean effect size. And I say, oh, reciprocal teaching has an effect size of 0.74. Okay? In effect size world, that's a high effect size, but that does not equate to a level 1. So then what I'd have to do, I'd have to pull out those studies again and say, the study that Max did was an experimental design. So that study that Max did, I can look at his study and say, well, yeah, that study would be a level 1. And maybe the study that Brian did, was a level 2, it was a quasi-experimental study. So I can pull out some studies and then I can say, I'm going to implement reciprocal teaching in my literacy classes. I'm going to cite Max Lang, 2011, Brian Storrs, whatever year his study was. And then I can plot it on here, but I can't just say, so-and-so says this thing has an effect size of this, and say it's level 1, 2, or 3. It's complicated. We're going to put together some kind of help for you. Because I actually went through and did that one on reciprocal teaching last week and said, oh my word, we can't ask LEAs in schools to do this.
Thank you.
And I know those studies. I'm like, nah, this isn't going to happen. We will provide you with something, some help.
Greatly appreciated.
Yeah.
But what you need to think about is what works really matters. You're gonna be spending these federal taxpayer dollars. You wanna do something that's going to make a difference. Because you're gonna be evaluating them there and say, oh, we've been doing the same thing for 20 years, our results are the same. Okay, then something needs to change. So the question we need to talk about here is not gaming the system, right? It's not just how can we check a box off to say, oh yeah, we did the evidence-based thing. It's really how can we use that evidence to improve student learning? That's what it's all about. Okay. And now, Dr. Maxeline will talk to us about school improvement, just sort of briefly. Leslie Evans is his partner in crime. She was not able to be here today.
It's a solo show, huh?
Max is excellent, so thank you.
No, it is. That's a good question. It's never a solo show because I never know the answers to any. Just for clarification, if you'll help me out here for a second. If you work in an LEA or a school that was identified for state school turnaround, okay, if you're an LEA or work in a school that was identified for like Title I school that was identified for comprehensive support and improvement, raise your hand. Good. If you're a high school that was identified for comprehensive support and improvement, well, let me see, high school representatives. How about if you are a school that was identified for a student group for targeted support and improvement? Okay, this is helpful because this kind of directs me in how many acronyms I can use as we talk about this, because there are a lot. My objective today is to, and as here this example demonstrates, there are multiple categories for school improvement. Each of them has their own identification criteria, requirements, and exit criteria. So my objective today is to really just kind of pair out each of those designations for school improvement or state school turnaround and just talk about what that means, okay? So as you know, you are aware, we are working currently under a new education act, the Every Student Succeeds Act. There is a piece of that act, that's 1003A, and it's school improvement. And as requirements and identifications and designations roll forward, what that means is there is a tie to a financial resource. When there's a tie to a financial resource, there are various requirements. ESSA 1003A has a requirement that states pull off a certain percentage off the top, set aside specifically for resources for schools that have been identified for school improvement under the Act. Utah has been functioning kind of under a different bit. The law actually says 7%. We have a hold harmless implementation because we have been working under an economic, as a state, an economic upswing. When we have an economic upswing, that means the Title I dollars, which are designated specifically, Becky was talking about this earlier, for poverty, that means the total allocation will go down. Because our total allocation went down, there wasn't sufficient funding to fund all of the Title I identified schools and requirements under the Act. So we've had a hold harmless here. We've reserved for school improvement less than 7%. It's bouncing around $3 million right now for schools identified in school improvement. Okay, here are our key terms. Here are generally under ESSA, and it's okay if I use that acronym, the categories. The first category is called Comprehensive Support and Improvement. And all of our Title I set aside for school improvement is being used to provide resources for schools identified in these two categories of comprehensive support and improvement. The two are Title I schools who are in the lowest 5% of Title I schools based on 3-year average of data. The second category of comprehensive support and improvement is any high school that has had a 67% or lower graduation rate 3 years on average. This one has been a new one for us, and it's been a new one for the nation because the law actually says any high school, which includes, and we've discovered this has really been a flare that has gone up nationwide, any high school includes alternative high schools. And just so you know, the CSI schools, Title I schools, we identified 18 Title I schools that were in this category. High schools, there were 17 high schools identified for low graduation rate. 11 of those 17 schools were alternative high schools. So this has been a real learning experience for us. This second category is also a new one. And I'm going to spend some time a little later talking specifically about that one. It's Targeted Support and Improvement, or TSI. What this says is schools that have student groups, at least 10 students in student groups that are performing at that level, that 5% cutoff for all schools. So that specific student group in a school is performing at that level or lower for 2 consecutive years identifies that school for targeted support and improvement. So previously, the terms under Title I were priority and focus schools. Those terms are no longer utilized in ESSA. This last piece here, which was the first category I started with, let me see what the next slide here says, is state school turnaround. In the previous version of the bill, where the state was identifying Title I schools under those categories, priority and focus, it had been doing so under that flexibility waiver for a number of years. Our state legislature at that time passed its own school improvement bill for the state called State Turnaround Leadership Development Act. It identified the lowest 3% of schools performing in the state accountability system, and the legislature did that at the same time that the state was implementing Title I priority and focus identification and requirements. So what happened at the time was that you had a school that was currently, it happened a couple of different times in our state, a school that was identified for priority or focus under Title I that newly was identified for state school turnaround. So it put these two bills, the state act and the federal act, kind of in contention with each other. There was a conflict there, and it created some confusion. So when ESSA was passed, our board decided to take this opportunity because there are certain requirements when a new act is passed. One of those things is that each state has to do a consolidated state plan. And in that consolidated state plan, each state determines timelines specifically for school improvement, timelines for identification. If there are any requirements that may go outside of those lines that are as identified in the statute, it allows for us to determine exit criteria and those kinds of things. So our board decided through board rule and our consolidated application that what we were going to do, as opposed to running 2 separate school improvement initiatives, each with its own identification criteria, exit criteria, and requirements, they were going to attempt to align these things together. So one of the charges that the board through rule gave to our state, data and statistics specifically, is that there would be one accountability system. Previously, we ran data for Title I schools, we ran data for the state, we ran data for rank ordering, so the board said, not anymore. We're going to run one state accountability system. The first criteria we're going to determine through that state accountability system is the lowest performing schools for the whole state who have performed there for 2 years consecutively, so 3% or lower for 2 years consecutively. Those schools are going to be identified for state school turnaround and follow the process, which I'm going to tell you here in just a second, moving forward. Then they said, after that, we're going to take the lowest performing Title I schools for 3 years on average, and they will be identified. After that, we're going to take, with the same accountability system, any high school that hasn't been identified in one of those previous 2 categories with a graduation rate of 67% or lower, 3 years on average, and they will be CSI schools. But what the board said is schools won't be identified. So if you're identified for state school turnaround, you will not be identified again for CSI as a Title I school, CSI for graduation rate as a high school, and we'll talk about here in a minute, you won't be identified for TSI, for your student group. You're going to follow one of those things or the other. That was the charge of the board. The second charge the board said is, okay, so we've now determined which schools will be designated into each of these categories of school improvement, state turnaround or school improvement under ESSA. The charge was given, okay, now that a school has been identified, what are going to be the policies, the required policies and procedures for any of those schools moving forward? So for state turnaround and school improvement, our agency worked with multiple stakeholder meetings of input. We had Title I directors that participated on a number of occasions to help us put this together. We worked pretty carefully with the Center on School Turnaround at Wested to help us develop a handbook which entails the processes and procedures that a school identified for school improvement goes through. We've based ours, which is multiple states have done this, in these 4 domains. So everything that moving forward goes through turnaround leadership. We're looking at that as a domain for school improvement, an area to focus on. Talent development, instructional transformation, and culture shift. Questions about the 4 domains? The 4 domains, and this is the process. Any school identified, state turnaround, or CSI under ESSA, there is a needs assessment and root cause analysis. For this past school year, the schools that were identified, this agency, USBE, contracted with an outside provider to go into each of those schools and conduct a needs assessment, root cause analysis, utilizing the tools that were developed by USBE, Center on School Turnaround at Wested, and our multiple stakeholders. That's completed for those schools. The next step is to create a school improvement plan based on the results of that root cause analysis report. Implement that plan, monitor the plan, and adjust course. This is the continuous improvement cycle. This handbook, the Utah System of Support for School Improvement, is on the USBE website. You can access it. You can use those tools. I will let you know that it's constantly changing. It's a pretty dynamic document. We're in the process now of updating some of the templates of forms and things in there that we've been utilizing. So here are the requirements for any school in turnaround, CSI, get to TSI, but these partially are part of those. Notify the parents. Becky has explained that. ESSA also requires that a school is identified for CSI in the development of the plan must have stakeholder input. And their list is principals, leaders, teachers, and parents are required to participate in the development of the plan. Establish a school leadership team. And then for schools in state turnaround or CSI, those plans, once developed, have to be approved by the local board. Once those plans are approved by the local board, they are submitted to USBE, and the state board must also approve them. Those are steps before resources or allocation of funding can be done. And this is just a timeline. So this past school year, 18-19, is the first time that we identified as a state each category of school improvement. It's been a busy year.
Sorry, I'm going back a little bit. So when stakeholders are involved in the improvement status, like with TSI, does that have to be like an open, public, any stakeholder is invited thing, or?
It's a really good question. And the statute lists specifically principal, it says other leaders, teachers, and then it says parents.
But can those be invited by the LEA to be on a committee, or is that an open public thing?
The statute doesn't define that. I think it would be, you're going to notify all of the parents. It could be that you want to invite those, but when you're talking about the development of a school improvement plan that's based on results of a root cause analysis report, if it's open to the public to come in and make comments, you may never get to a point where you're actually planning. So you want to be, really plan that specifically for that result. Yeah.
So when we did ours, we talked about it at our PIG meeting, which is our Parent Involvement Committee meeting, and the parents selected 3 people to represent them, and then they became part of the team that is regularly involved. That's how we.
That'd be a really smart way to do that. That's good. Thank you. So this timeline, this year we identified everything. State turnaround, we identified CSI for Title I schools for achievement. We identified high schools for graduation rate, and we identified TSI. I'm going to talk about the impact of that TSI. Exit criteria for turnaround and CSI for, let me tell you, turnaround, the exit criteria says, for the second, so school turnaround, state school turnaround schools are identified for 3 years. 18-19 was the identification year. Next year, or this coming school year, is the implementation year. The year following is a second implementation year. To exit state school turnaround, those schools have to be above the 3% cutoff for the second year and third year, both, to exit. For CSI schools, for Title I, it's a 4-year process. The first year, 18-19, is the identification year. The next 3 years are implementation years. At the end of the 4th year, or the 3rd year of implementation, Title I schools identified for CSI must achieve above the 15% cutoff for Title I schools to exit. CSI schools for graduation rate, so those high schools, again, 4 years, 18-19 was the identification year. This school year and the following 2 years will be implementation years. So those schools have to consecutively, at the 3rd and 4th year, have a graduation rate higher than 67% for those 2 years to exit. A lot of moving parts in this.
So in the first category, theoretically, if other schools do more poorly than your school, you're off of turnaround?
So they're each year.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like a rotating.
Possible. It's statistically possible.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you can drop down the next year again and go back. It's kind of that rotating.
Were any of you, just for a point of reference, were any of you at the Title I directors meeting where our coordinator for data and statistics did the whole flip chart presentation of each of these so it's a good point. It becomes really complicated, and in general terms is kind of what I'm sticking with today. So I want to talk specifically about this group because this is a new one. And what's new about this is it impacts not only Title I schools, it impacts any school in the state. So any school in the state that has at least 10 students in one of the reporting categories, and the list of those categories, they're racial and ethnic groups, and specifically the groups are economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, English learners, American Indian, Alaska Native, Asian, African American, Hispanic, Caucasian, multiracial, or Pacific Islander. Any school that has at least 10 students reported in those categories can be identified for TSI if that student group for 2 consecutive years has performed below that 5% cutoff for schools. So if you think about it this way, it's each of those student groups is run through the state accountability system as if it's its own school. It could be 10 students, 15 students. They're run through that accountability system. They receive their own points and percentage. And if that percent of points and point total is at or below that 5% for 2 consecutive years, the school is identified for TSI. And just to share the impact of this particular category, this past school year, 18-19, Utah identified 330 schools in the state for TSI for at least one student group. For students with disabilities as a student group, 211 of those schools were identified specifically for that group. 208 of those schools were identified for at least the English learner student group. Yes, please.
So I need some clarification because I'm a little confused. So it's under ESSA, so if those schools were identified but they're not Title I, we still need to notify all the parents that that school is in TSI under this category, even though they're not Title I, but they're still under ESSA. Okay.
Yeah, this is a very new category. This and the high school one was very new for this particular version of the bill, this act. So the requirements for schools identified for TSI is quite different. If a school is identified for state turnaround or comprehensive support and improvement, the state enacts certain things. We notify that school, the state conducts a needs assessment root cause analysis, the state will review and approve the plan, and then the allocation and the use of those resources. For TSI, the state's requirement under ESSA is to notify the LEA of schools in their LEA that have been identified and designated as TSI. Then it becomes the LEA's responsibility to notify the school, to do a needs assessment, to develop a plan, utilizing the same stakeholder input, including parents, and then to implement that plan. The state, we won't approve those plans. We won't check to see of the evidence-based requirements in those plans, but they are required for TSI. So this is just that same list right up until this point, submitting the plans. You won't submit TSI plans. It's an LEA responsibility to approve those, though they do need to be approved by the LEA, and to implement those. To exit in brief. So again, it's a 4-year designation. 18-19 was the identification year. This coming school year is implementation year 1. The following year, implementation year 2. The year after that, implementation year 3. To exit this category of TSI, for each student group for which a school is identified, that student group within those 4 years for 2 consecutive years must perform above that 5% cutoff. So it could be year 2 and 3, it could be year 3 and 4, but within those 4 years. A school that is a Title I school that has been identified as TSI that does not exit is elevated to the level of comprehensive support and improvement, meaning at that point, the state will come in, conduct a needs assessment, root cause analysis, plan approval, and those kinds of actions. Tons of moving parts, lots and lots of acronyms. Aaron talked for 3 hours about just the algorithms and the statistics used for the identification and exit criteria. What questions do you have about school improvement? Please.
So if I'm hearing this right, you're only always going to have 5%.
That's the cutoff.
You could have a whole buttload of schools that need this, but you're only going to take that 5%.
For the designation and identification for the state, there will be each year a 5% cutoff. And then any school that has a student group that with 10 or more students gets run through the state accountability system. If for 2 consecutive years, that group falls below that 5% and hasn't already been identified, that school will be identified. So it happens each year. Did that answer your question?
Kind of. I'm working on it.
Yeah, okay. Well, so who was next? Please.
The special ed group category, are they compared to other special ed? How are they? Like, what's their 5%? Is that?
It's
Is
right,
it compared to other
be,
special ed students,
it's
or is
not.
it compared to general population?
General population, yeah. It's the indicators under the accountability
So
system.
the
Growth,
special ed
achievement.
students in that group have to do better than the lowest 5% general population of the
Yes.
of the state. Okay.
Great question, yes.
When you talk about Title I schools, is that Title I full schools, or is that targeted school assistance schools, or both?
Any school that receives Title I funding.
But one, to jump off her question, so what happens if you're in your first year, you're not in your second year? Aren't you kind of set aside and then the 5% is designated because you have to hit that second year of not being in the bottom 5 to
For
get
TSI?
out of that? Yeah.
If a school is identified for one student group for TSI, that student group won't be re-identified. Progress will be noted, but they won't be re-identified for that student group next year.
Right,
because it has to be 2 consecutive years. So you have 4 years to achieve 2 consecutive years above that. And in those 4 years, you won't be identified for that student group again.
Could you?
Yes, you could.
Each year.
Each year.
Okay, and the second thing is when they do their, okay, now I'm talking like TSI for if you have that group, say the ESL group. So they're not a Title I school, but they still have to do a school improvement plan. Is there a template for that? Do you want that plan a certain way? Can it be a part of their school improvement plan, their TSSA plan? Do you want that more standardized? How would the state like the LEAs to collect that information?
Couple of things. The state is not going to review or approve those plans. The statute has the words in it that says a plan must be developed specifically for that. But by no means, I think, is it the state's expectation that you develop a school improvement plan specific and individual for that school, for that student group. They would be part of your school improvement plan.
You needed to follow that same protocol a couple of slides back for Title I.
Well, and what I was going to continue is there is a specific template for school improvement plans for schools identified for state school turnaround or CSI in those categories. They must utilize the templates in the handbook. TSI, it's available to use, and if you use those templates, you can be pretty assured that you're going to at least go through a process of planning based on root causes. So identifying strategies that are based on the root causes of low performance in the school, and that you will be identifying the evidence-based level. Because as Becky pointed out, this is a school improvement under ESSA requirement, therefore those evidence-based strategies must be in those top 3 tiers of evidence-based. Great questions. Please.
Sorry to ask this question.
No,
And you know,
it's great.
This is all based on having accurate end-of-year data. So
if you've read the news.
Thank you for asking.
You saw how I was trying to sneak away.
I know, but that's why I'm like, sorry,
Yeah.
Max.
Yeah.
But, so for not having that, what's the plan, or do we have a plan yet?
And I would ask Becky to pitch in here because she's probably received more updated information. At the time, my understanding is we're not quite sure yet. As you know in the news, the board approved canceling the contract with Questar, which was the platform to host the dissemination of the assessment, the RISE assessment. So that contract is canceled. Is there additional information about that?
Well, at the board meeting, the board approved a new 3-year contract with AIR, who had done the SAGE assessments. They will be doing the assessments for the coming 3 years, while the state really has an opportunity to, do an in-depth search for a provider. But I also heard earlier this week from someone who works with the assessment department that they got data from the vendor. The data was not what they felt was good, so they sent it back. They got data back a second time. They've sent that data back again. So at this point in time, we don't really know whether we will have data or not. I'm sure at some point in time, Assistant Superintendent Darren Nielsen, who is over assessment accountability, will probably, issue a press release or something, but that's all we know at this point.
Great. Thank you, Becky. Great question. Please.
Okay, I'm just trying to wrap my head around timing. So, I have a school that was identified last year, but I'm assuming it was based on 17-18 scores. That is TSI. I have more than one, but let's do one. Okay. And so last year would have been the first implementation year, is that correct?
So 18-19 school year was the identification year.
Okay, so then we have 3 more years for implementation before we know, before they're looked at again as far as classification? Or what happens with
They're
them?
going to be looked at every year to see if that student group met that threshold, that 5%. Because within that 4 years, the exit criteria for TSI says, if for 2 consecutive years that student group performs above that 5% cutoff, then the school would exit TSI status for that student group.
Okay, so last year then was the identification year. So then this year and next year, or would it be last year and this year if they did 2 consecutive years above?
We don't have test data to determine what the progress was like for 18-19 in those testing results. But technically the wording in our approved consolidated plan says within those 4 years. So it could be that when we get tested any 2 years consecutively, that student group for that school is above that 5%, that school would exit for that student group.
Okay, so that school, let's say they were low last year and they're low this year. That's 2 years where they're below, but then they do well the next 2 years. But they haven't had to go CSI yet, even though they've been low for 2 years.
Yeah, a school that's identified for a TSI group won't be identified again for CSI.
Oh, okay. That's what I was going to ask. So you can't go from TSI to CSI at any time?
So the way a TSI group, a school identified for a TSI student group that does not successfully meet that threshold at the end of the 4 years and is a Title I school, elevates to a CSI category specifically for that student group.
Okay.
It's really, it's 4 years, yeah.
Got it.
And then once that school is identified as a CSI school for that student group, then it starts that process. There's that identification year, needs assessment, 3 years of implementation.
And we don't know about last year because we don't have data. So we're just.
So we're only using that one test to determine all of it.
The state accountability system contains multiple indicators so there's an achievement and progress indicator, but there's also an EL indicator, there's a lowest quartile indicator, 25%, and then for high schools there are a couple additional indicators there, but there's multiple indicators.
I might be totally getting off on the weeds here.
It's pretty easy.
You are not a Title I school and you do not get out of TSI for 4 years. You just live indefinitely in TSI, or?
Right. The consolidated plan does not identify an action there. I think what it alludes to is uses the words more rigorous interventions.
Up to the state.
And I'm just going to leave it at that. Great questions. Yeah.
Okay, I just did it again, multiple repetitions over time here. So if out of the 330 schools that were identified and we got notification last spring, right now, next week or whenever school started, this starts their 2nd year.
Yes.
So last year was not their 2nd year.
No.
Yay, you have a big aha from all of those principals.
3 years moving forward, so.
We now have 3 years. Thank you. Okay, good.
Great questions. Listen, like I said, this all happened this year. And one thing I can tell you in full transparency is in a lot of regards, we're kind of learning this as we're going along. So as questions come up, by all means, please contact Leslie Nelson, whose contact information is on that first note. You can contact me or Becky or anybody on the team. Leslie, that's the actor, right? Leslie Nelson. Leslie Evans. I think that's like the 3rd time I've done that publicly, too. Thank goodness she's not here. Leslie Nelson was the guy in Airplane, the movie.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So please contact us, because what we've discovered as we're going through this process is in a lot of regards, we don't know in implementing this what consequences this has. So when you call and ask us questions, we don't know, and a lot of times, what questions we need to be pursuing unless you ask them. So please contact us. Or you just want to go through one more time these processes, because believe me, this is like the 87th time we've done a PowerPoint to just try to walk through this. So thank you. I'll be around, so. Nobody tells her that I called her that.
I know, too late.
I like going after Max. Because it makes Title I monitoring seem easy. But I don't like going after Max because he's presented 87 times. This is the 2nd time that I've presented this information. But I appreciate you all being here today. And as you've done, please ask questions as we go along if you have any. The back of your packet, you should have a year at a glance. And this just indicates responsibilities here at the state, at the district, or at the charter school level. And so you can reference that for things that are due or things you should be thinking about. And if there are anything that you see that should be on there, let me know and we'll add that on. So monitoring, a lot of people, when they know that they'll have Title I monitoring visit, feel like they're on a tightrope above a vast valley, vulnerable, alone, and exposed. And so what I'd like to do in this next few minutes is to let you know that it may feel like that, but it doesn't have to be like that. In fact, when ESSA amended ESEA, the focus changed, where the sole emphasis used to be on federal program compliance. Now, our focus has shifted to identifying and addressing the specific needs of children who are beneficiaries of the programs funded by ESEA. So how are the students benefiting from the ways that your schools, your LEAs, are allocating funds? That's what I will be looking at in the programmatic monitoring visit. There are a couple of tools that you use each year in order to show you are in compliance, speaking of going back to the days of No Child Left Behind. But this makes it a little easier because I don't have to come out and visit. This is just something you do each year to meet the requirements. The first one is Utah Grants Management System. How many have already been in there and looked at the Title I application? So a few people. What do you think? Oh, we have one, yes, like the forms. Do you miss the UCA?
Although, once you get to know it, it's like...
So do you have the ranking stuff in there yet or anything? Any of that
Is
stuff?
that pre-populated, Becky? The rank, were they gonna pre-populate schools in the LEAs on the budget, on the building eligibility page?
I
Yeah.
thought they were going to pre-populate it.
So
let's see now, I
Not
just,
pre-populated. We can't see what you see.
where would it be?
Pre-populated for a number of years in UCA, but I don't think it was pre-populated last year.
building eligibility page in the Utah grants.
It is going to be pre-populated.
It will be.
What's the timeline on that? Do we know yet?
It should be there.
I'm trying to track.
I didn't see
I
that, but I'm a
didn't
single
see it.
I
site.
can't get on the internet, but,
Building eligibility.
where is it then?
Well, let me show you. Besides these forms and pages people are talking about that replace the UCA, there's also a big long thing that you have to plug in information in. But the good news is you do it this year and then you only have to tweak it in the next years to come. Unlike the UCA, where you had to update the needs assessment and you had to update the LEA plan every year, this time you show the LEA has a plan. Because the LEA plan, you have a vision for your district, for your schools. And that may not change very much year to year. If it does, you just tweak it next year. And then there are a bunch of assurances.
Now, on that plan, is it one that we will, I've looked at it, but I haven't gotten into it really. Do we complete it on the grant system, or do we download, complete it, and upload?
It looks like this, and it's a fillable PDF on Utah grants.
On the grant, so we
Now,
put
I
it in.
did have a call yesterday from an LEA who, I think the person that was supposed to fill it out downloaded it, emailed it to somebody to fill out for him, and then she filled it out and then sent it back to him to upload, and it didn't save any of the information. So as far as I know, you need to do that in Utah grants, but I'm not sure. I just referred her to the help desk because, like Becky said, we've lost our view of what you see. That's one disadvantage from our point. So that's this. There are about 5 pages of section 112 that Becky went over of the LEA plan that you just fill in information. So you check the LEA operates school-wide targeted assistance, both school-wide targeted assistance, and then you describe what you're doing. Yeah.
Describe what we're doing. What kind of evidence do you want, like uploaded or linked or anything, or just what we're doing?
Just
is
what you're
enough?
doing. I don't know even if there's a place where you can upload additional
No,
documents.
I'm not asking for it.
That will get, when you get to the DMI, which is the second tool, then you will need to indicate how schools are using evidence base. Okay, so we have the Title I plan, we have assurances, forms and pages, and then the desktop monitoring, the DMI, has an annual core, has 2 parts, an annual core and then a cycle. And can I hear a yes, yay, hooray, cycle 3 is over? And we can move on to cycle 4, which hopefully will be a little easier than cycle 3 was this past year. Okay, so Utah grants, if you need any help, here's the information for the help desk. They can walk you through any technical problems that we can't. Utah grants needs to be finished and completed by November 1st. That hasn't changed. It's the same as the UCA was. And then I just wanted to show you what the assurances look like in Utah grants. So that has red writing over here, and you check yes, no, not applicable. Some of it won't be applicable if you're a single site charter school. But some of it will ask you to explain if you mark not applicable, or no, or not applicable.
That column that says description or assurance, it's just describing which it is, whether you need to provide a description
Right.
word in the LEA response or whether you're just marking assurances. You don't really fill anything.
So the description requires a response, and then the assurance just requires a check mark. Yes. Yes. Okay, any other questions on Utah grants? So we can move to the more antiquated desktop monitoring tool, the DMI. It's an oldie but a goodie. It still works. But Becky realized that it still said Utah State Office of Education, and I asked IT if they could change it, and it's so old they can't even change it without destroying the whole program. The DMI, if you don't have a login password, if you would contact Renee or Becky in the back, evil Becky, for login information. And if you've had major changes at your LEA where one person no longer is going to be doing the uploading, then have her take that person off. This is to be completed by December 1st. We will have a training. I highly recommend you come on the 18th. That way you can come here, ask questions, finish it, and be all done September, possibly, or just have a little bit left to do. So it's the afternoon. In the morning will be a Title I directors meeting. So it's just in conjunction with that.
Al?
Yeah.
Let me make one comment on the
Assurances. This.
No, on the
Building
building eligibility. One of the LEAs called earlier this week and said the numbers that were pre-populated didn't match with the numbers they had at the LEA level. So he wanted to know if he could change those numbers. So like I said, we can't see the same screens that you see. We see a whole different view. But I contacted our grants management team, and there is a column on that school allocation page, several columns over, that says adjusted number of low-income students. If you need to change those numbers, that is the column you use.
For the number of students.
Yeah, so if you need to adjust, if you need to adjust the poverty rate or the number of,
Is it just the number of
adjusted
students?
number of low-income students, you can fix it there. Because they pre-populated already how many low-income students they pre-populated,
the percentage rate, and that's
Income still equate to free and reduced lunch, is that
Yeah.
the same term?
Yes.
Okay.
So, but that was based on last year, so we don't know any. We don't know who's coming this year yet.
No, you don't.
So this is based on.
Yeah, it's based on last year.
One thing I just wanted to say, if you do come on December 18th, bring your computer so you can be working on your own application. Like I said, there are two parts to the DMI. The annual core, and since it has annual in its name, it's done every year. The annual core has criteria questions, which, if answered incorrectly, will pre-populate questions that have nothing to do with your school, or your LEA, I should say. Okay, so I just want to distinguish, because it's easy to confuse. Let's see, where is it? Do you have any schools identified for targeted support and improvement? Please answer that no if you don't have schools. And do you have any approved targeted assistance programs? If you do have targeted assistance programs, answer yes. But those can be confused very easily. You may have both, right? You may have a Title I school that's targeted assistance. So maybe it has 35% low income. And it has been identified for TSI. But some people think, oh, it says TSI, that must be targeted, like just because it uses targeted. And it's very confusing. So just make sure you're answering those questions correctly. Robin.
Okay. Sorry. So I got that part. Now, if they got their TSI because they're ESL, but they're not TSI because of the Title I part, do you want us to put yes or no there?
Yes.
Put yes, okay.
Yes. You have a TSI school in your LEA. And then that will pre-populate a question that says the district is, is supervising that program. So that's why that question is there. So it's replaced focus and priority questions. Any other questions on the criteria questions? So the uploads that you will need, and then we will go over this again on September 18th, but if you want to prepare, if you're like Nancy, who called me about a month ago and said, when will the DMI be ready? I'm like, what? She's like, it's summertime, we don't have as much to do. She just wanted to get it done. But every year, you need to upload documents. If you are a district, you need to have an invitation of your consultation to the private schools, private nonprofit. Charter schools do not need to do that. Charter schools do not need to have a consultation with the private schools either. If you're a district and you notify all the public, non-public schools in your attendance area, and they say not interested, then all you would have to do is provide documentation that you invited them. If you had one that said, yeah, we're interested, we want some funding, then you would also upload the Equitable Services checklist. Now the criteria questions will also, you need to make sure you've answered those correctly because they will populate questions specifically based on that. And then everybody, charter or district LEA, need to upload documentation of an annual Title I meeting. Now that's not last year's Title I meeting that you upload and it still has last year's date on it, nor is it last year's that you change the date and just upload. It should be the real thing. Some people upload the PowerPoint that one school used or that your school used. Some people upload the agenda. I want evidence that you have talked to parents about what Title I is. It's not just me, it's the federal government. But I rarely see this. So I want documentation that they were informed, that they were given an opportunity to be part of the process. I can't remember who asked the question. It was Jennifer. What parent should be involved with that? Well, in Title I, everybody should be given the opportunity to take part in decision making. Now, most parents won't because they don't have the time. And also, I would like to see, and so would the federal government, that you're explaining how your school is using Title I. That's really empowering for parents to see that.
So when for example, I sent the agenda, here are the items that we've discussed. Mm-hmm. Is that sufficient or is there something else that you want to see?
No.
Notes from the conversation or any of that? Okay.
No.
Agenda.
Yeah, but sometimes people, and I love when people incorporate Title I annual meeting in with their back to school night. I think it's a great pairing. However, the agenda does something like this. It's like back to school, welcome, classrooms, Title I, hot dogs. And then I was like, well, what happened in the Title I section? So if you could be a little more explicit in the Title I section, that would be helpful. And then the last three are fiscal documentation that annually must be provided. And Sandy will talk more about that. So cycle 4, I mentioned cycle 3 because cycle 3 was hard on some of us, where we had to update, you had to update parent-family engagement policies, both at the LEA level and at the school level. And I already thanked Jennifer because I used C.S. Lewis's parent-family engagement policy as a model policy for people who contacted me saying, what is this supposed to look like? And C.S. Lewis had one of the first that I saw that if I were a parent would make my eyes roll to the back of my head. It was like the actual school community was taken into consideration. And then Renee had to leave, and the itinerant one went through several iterations, and they didn't finish theirs until springtime, but it was a beautiful thing. And I'm hoping to have some of these uploaded to the non-existent resources tab, so you can see the great things that are going on in Utah. There are some LEAs that needed additional time. If you're one of those LEAs that has not yet submitted an updated parent-family engagement policy, either for the LEA or for a school or the parent-family compact or the school family compact, that needs to be done before September. That makes sense that you would talk about these things in September. Otherwise, your funds will be put on hold because that was a requirement of last year. I will send out a reminder to those that needed more time. Okay, so cycle 4, easier because all you need to do is assure that your school-wide plan has all the things that Becky said it needed to have. And those questions will be pre-populated if you answer, yes, we have a school-wide program. And if you answer, we have a targeted assistance program, special questions will be populated for you. How do you identify your students based on multiple and objective criteria? Yes, no. If you answer no, you better be taking care of that soon. Okay, so I just anticipate cycle 4 will be a little easier on you all. What can you do now if you're like Nancy and you want to be prepared? Well, know what's going to be done in the Title I meetings. If you're at the district level, be in contact with the schools. What are you going to be talking about in your Title I meeting or at your back to school night? I know many people, this is so fresh, you don't want to go back and review it, so you leave it till the springtime to review. But these should be ongoing revisions made to that. And you could talk about these at your back to school night Title I meeting. You could refer to them. You could notify parents and family members in multiple ways so that they're aware of them. And I'll talk more about that in just a second. And then Becky talked about parents' right to know the qualifications. All you really need to say is, parents, family members, you have the right to know the qualifications of your teachers. And if you want to know that, please do the following. Go on our website, contact me. So make them aware, but you don't have to have everybody's master's degree thesis published for them to read. And that goes for paraprofessionals too. If the student has a paraprofessional in their classroom, they can ask about the qualifications of paras. Okay, back to the LEA report card, the school report card. So this is kind of up in the air right now. Obviously, if you don't get information from the state, you can't provide it to parents. Okay, so just note this isn't due until December 1st. So if you get it all done September 18th, you would still need to upload if somehow the state received data that was usable. You would still need to provide that to parents, and then you would still need to upload something to the DMI to indicate that. I'm sorry, you don't need to upload anything. You just need to say yes. If for some reason they are not able to provide that information by December 1st, just put not monitored on that. And I'll go over that again on September 18th. Oh, the school-wide plan. You need at least a one-page summary available if you're a school-wide school or if you have school-wide schools in your LEA. So that could be posted on the website. I love it when I go to schools' websites and I see their Title I. They have a whole Title I section. And I can see their parent-family engagement policy. I can see their family school compact. And I can see what they're spending their money on. And parents can see that too. And I've been to, I think it was in CAT. I've been to so many schools. Maybe it was this year, Tammy, if you remember. It was posted on their wall. Was it one of your schools, Cash, that had their Title I summary plan posted?
I think that's Canyon Elementary that did that.
Yeah.
She's one of those
awesome. And I stole the parent compact, the school parent compact from Cash. It was Canyon School, and used it as a model, as a sample for schools. So I really appreciate being able to see all to share with others. Okay, how to share with parents in this electronic age. Well, you can in that back to school barrage that you send all those handouts, policy books, you can include it in that. They're probably not going to find it, but you can include it in that as an attempt, because some will go through every page. Posting on your website, it would be wonderful if LEAs and schools had a Title I section on their website. Not to segregate that funding, because it should be combined with your school goals, but to just highlight what Title I is doing. At your back to school night presentation, at your charter board meeting, and the notes made available. If you have a local newspaper, if you're a small LEA and you have one of those like little journal things that I get, you can include look, here's our school family compact. And if you have a family section in your building that family members tend to congregate, you could just have it posted there. Any other ways that you make Title I documentation available? I liked how one charter school did it. He sent out a monthly newsletter, as many of you do, and he would highlight a section of the school compact, because the school compact can be a pretty powerful tool. And because he knew parents were not going to get it the first time around, nor the second time around. And so he would just take chunks of that parent-family engagement policy, or not the policy, sorry, the compact, and just highlight that in the newsletter. Okay, let's talk about the nitty-gritty. On-site visits. If you're a new LEA, you will get an on-site visit the second year just to check in and make sure that all these things that we've talked about today you understand and are putting into place. In the past, we've been on a 5-year rotation, and that changed this year. So beginning this year, a two-pronged approach that has a risk-based assessment. So and I think Tammy or Sandy will talk about the risk-based assessment. If your school has a high risk, then you will get a monitoring visit just to hopefully help mitigate risk, so that you don't run into problems down the road, and nor do we. And then we will still have a rotating schedule, but it may not be every 5 years. Some LEAs, as we were reviewing the list, got bumped because we were like, we've already talked to them. We visited Ogden 3 times this year and talked with JM, and we know what's going on, so we can bump them to next year when we're going to go do a Title III monitoring visit anyway and just combine it. So this is the list, and there are several of you here probably because you are on the list to have a monitoring visit. There are about 7 people in the room that either they themselves or their school or LEA survived a monitoring visit in the last 2 years. Any questions on the list? Yeah,
That's not in timeline order, is
it? Yes, you're first. You are first, right there. So districts first, and then alphabetical order. We're going to combine with Title III and come in December. The others we will talk about. We were expanded monitoring visit season. So instead of waiting until after DMI is completed, we can start scheduling visits as soon as October. So just a reminder, I know Becky said that plan, you needed to plan first and then decide how the funds were going to support that plan. I would say even stepping back one is how critical to really identify what the core, the root causes are for whatever the needs are that you have identified. Title I is not just about academics. Title I can be about more than academics. It can be about mental health. It can be about behavior system in the school. Okay, so being clear on what the actual needs are of the students that you want to address is very critical. So that will be part of my monitoring. The second one will be what is the actual plan. And then the last one is what benefits are you seeing from your plan? And this should be iterative, right? You should be evaluating that during the year, at the end of the year, and making any changes you need to. There is support. Mostly make sure you have my phone number, Becky's phone number, Sandy's phone number, Tammy's phone number, so you can call us or email us. if you have a question. So that support is always there. This we do annually, and as you can tell, some people keep coming. Hopefully you do benefit from it. And we provide Title I directors meetings at least twice a year. And Becky this year was able to do a fabulous event at Title I Summer Conference that some of you got to attend. It just kind of took parent engagement to a new level, which was just very exciting. And then that DMI training on September 18th. For other support, you can go to the website. I know the website is hard to navigate. And right now that non-existent resources tab is still non-existent, but it's on my to-do list. There are sample items, whether it's for fiscal, there are some parent engagement samples. So check back regularly. For Title I monitoring, it's monitoring and compliance, and then there's the improving basic programs. Those are the two that have most to do with Title I. And this year, I did a Qualtrics survey of those that we went out and monitored. So we had a total of 27 on-site visits. And I sent the survey out to 40 because for LEAs that we visited, the LEA and the school districts and schools, I sent it to the principals as well. How positive or negative was your overall experience? Most people had a pretty positive experience, which surprised me because most of the time they're like, they really don't want that experience. How manageable or unmanageable was the entire Title I on-site review process? I know it takes time away from all your responsibilities. And so again, I was very surprised that many people thought it was manageable. And then how valuable was it? And I again thought, wow, most people thought it was a valuable experience for their own reflection. And that's really where change happens, is if you at the LEA level can reflect on your own practices and make changes to create improved conditions for students. There was one that said it was not valuable at all, and that person chose to comment and said because it took them away from their duties from And then how likely or unlikely are you to reach out to USBE staff after the visit compared to before? This one just intrigues me. It's like, no way am I going to talk to you ever again.
Safe person.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. And the people that said neither more or less likely just said they were going to reach out the same amount. So again, I felt like that was a positive response from people who participated in that in a monitoring visit. So what I'm hoping is you sense now, if you receive a monitoring visit this year or in the future, that you're not high up off the ground, you're not as exposed. It is still going to feel scary, but it doesn't have to be lonely. And hopefully there are many more benefits than detriments. So are there any last questions for me? What happened to my arm? Well, since I taught middle school for so long, I still have that invincibility mentality. And so when I bike commute to work, sometimes I take corners a little too sharply. All right, and I think it's Sandy.
Fiscal issues.
Okay, I'll start.
Tammy will be taking over this from me. So if you haven't met Tammy, this is Tammy Long. And so she will be doing most of the fiscal. So this is the last time you'll see me up here.
Is that?
Tammy will do that from now
Why
on.
is that? Are you leaving us?
It's just that we're splitting the responsibilities so that it's a little more evened out.
And so Tammy's gonna be doing
A bunch of other
Title I and Title III, and I'll be doing everything else. So I'll be working with she'll be doing Title 1A. I'll do C and D and Title 4B and all of those other things. So we're just kind of separating out who does what. But since Tammy is still brand new and she's never done this before, so she asked me if I would walk through it so that she'd know what she has to do, and she gets to do it.
We welcome you, Tammy, we just adore her. Yeah, we love you too, Tammy.
So, set-asides. So with ESSA, there are more required set-asides than there were before. So one of the things that you're going to have to do is Equitable Services, and we've talked about this on and on and on. Services for homeless, which we've always done before. Service for neglected and delinquent is a new one. So that one has been added on there. And parent and family engagement has been on there, and it's only mandatory if you receive more than $500,000 in. But, you know, parent and family engagement is so important, you probably ought to set aside a little bit for that anyway. So, okay, these are ones that are optional. So if you need to set aside money for administration. Now this is at the LEA level, not at the school level. So if you're setting aside admin costs, then it needs to be 5% or less. You can set aside money for early learning, pre-K classes. You can set aside money for foster care. That's, again, part of that neglected and delinquent kind of thing. And you can set aside money to help with CSI or TSI schools. Yes?
Sorry to ask, is there any kind of a guideline for the foster care, set aside, or delinquent children?
They're going to be similar to what we did with homeless before. The minimum you set aside has to be your PPA on that page. And then if you know you have more than that, you can set aside more than that. If you have facilities within your district, then they ought to be working with Murray Mazaris and trying to get a specific grant for neglected and delinquent inside the facilities. So you may want to look into that. Yes.
So similar question, but with the CSI and TSI, are there guidelines around the set-asides for like minimum and maximum and what that looks like?
Not at this time. CSI schools will actually get some money from the school improvement. TSI is up to the districts. So you're in control of, you know, how you help those schools. So one of the things you can do is set aside some of your Title I money to do that. But you don't have to. You can set aside other money or you can do it other ways. Just depends on what your district decides they want to do. Other questions? Okay. So these are some of the managed things that, again, you can do at the LEA level. So you can do the extended day. So that means you can use Title I money to do an after-school or before-school program. You can set aside money to do that. You can do a full day or an extended day kindergarten as long as those students fit the profile for Title I. Okay? Early learning pre-K, you can do a summer school for pre-K. You may want to do a summer school for those kids that are kind of on the cusp or just below grade level to keep them going through the summer so they get back up to date. You can use some time for teachers to do this kind of thing. And always supplemental instructional material. But again, it has to be supplemental. Questions? Most of the stuff hasn't changed. Okay, uses of Title I schools. or Title I funds. Becky talked about how you're supposed to do your grant application this year, about how you're going to not get the money and fund something, but you are supposed to plan and then fund. That's what it is. Special support for student initiative funds for student achievement. That's the after-school program. That may be a preschool program. It may be small group programs. It may be a pull-out program. But whatever will work to help you maintain the levels of education. Supplement, not supplant. That's the thing that we hit last year that had everybody going crazy. And this says that you can't use Title I money to pay for something that should have been paid for with your state and local funds, like your principals, your basic teaching, your basic curriculum. All of those kinds of things should be paid out of regular state, local funds. That's not a Title I expense. So you have to have a written methodology, which we went through most of you last year and kept repeating, no, you got to change this, you got to, and you don't want to, you don't need to put in, this is Title I exempt. What you have to show is, here's my state and local money, here's how I'm spending it. That's what they're looking for. And we will probably ask you to do that again this year, but just put in your spreadsheet that says, here's what we spent it on. The other thing that you have to look at with the supplement, not supplant, is that if you are keeping any of your Title I at the LEA level, that also has to be supplemental and not supplanting state and local funds. So if you're keeping money at the district level, then somehow you've got to explain how you're spending that money. Okay? Questions?
And does that,
yes.
Would that include your set-asides?
No, your set-asides, we already know what you're going to do that for. No, this is like if you're keeping money specifically at the district level to do professional development. What kind of professional development are you doing? Is it for all teachers? How are you doing that? How is it supplemental to what's going on? Okay, other questions? Comparability report is an every year, every time thing. So with charter schools with only one building, it's a very simple, straightforward, one-pager to fill out and do. But it does have to be done every single year. So for the rest of you then, you've got a multi-page thing. Well, Tammy and I have been working on trying to make that part easier. So we now have a fillable PDF that you can do. It will calculate your numbers for you. You don't have to have your calculator sitting right next to you. So as you put the numbers in, it will pre-populate all of the answers. So hopefully that will make that easier, faster to do. But we'll go over that in the training about how to fill that out and how to do that. So with the comparability report, there are two options. One option is to do it by FTE, student-teacher ratios, and the curriculum ratio, or you can do it by teacher salaries to student, cost per student on teacher salaries, and the curriculum. So you have two options at the first, that you do either the student staff ratios and curriculum, or you do the salaries and the ratio. You can do one of the other, the first one, but you always have to do the second one. So just kind of be aware that there's those two things. Okay, here's some allowable uses. Professional development, obviously. extra textbooks, extra worksheets, extra whatever you need, manipulatives to help those students who are in need of extra help. Extended day or year programs. We talked about early childhood. We talked about kindergarten, parent and family engagement. You can do it counseling. If you need, let's say you have a half-time counselor, but you need a full-time counselor. You can use Title I money to pay for that extra time if you need a counselor. You can also use it if you're school-wide for accelerated programs, because that's part of your school-wide plan. Supplemental personnel, so that means your paraprofessionals. If you need an extra first grade teacher, you suddenly find that you have a lot more students than you thought you were going to have, and the district only gave you enough for 3 first grade teachers, but you need another one, then you can use Title I money to do that. Questions? Grading funds. Okay, so this is a way of looking at funds, and if you remember back in the old days with the UCA, had here are my goals, here are the funds that I'm going to use to help fund that goal. Well, this is the same idea with grading, is that you're looking at how can you combine your allocations to help your goal meet its conclusion. So it's a way to look at that. So, Title III is now part of Title I. And so how do you use the Title III funds that you get in conjunction with your Title I funds to make sure that those students who need extra, English language assistance can meet the standards that you're holding to? There's going to be a planning tool that we'll get to do that, and we'll give you more information in September when we get that all stuff put together. But it's something that you can do. We sort of did it in UCA when we were doing that program. They had one. All right, reimbursements requests. These are all online. They're all through Utah grants. You will get audited, monitored at least one of those requests, at least one, which means that we'll ask for your general ledger and we'll ask for time effort documentation, just to make sure everything's in order. And as long as everything's in order, we'll probably only ask for it once. But if we're finding things that aren't kosher, then you may be asked to do it more than once. So just kind of be aware that you're going to be asked to do that. We would like your requests at least quarterly. Monthly is best, but at least quarterly, so that we don't have 16 boxes of documentation. If you request all of your funds in one request, then we are going to ask you for all of your documentation. It means all of your receipts, everything, not just your general ledger. So you better off if you just kind of a little bit at a time. Requests must be preceded by, number one, you have to have your grant approved or you can't get the money anyway. Utah grants won't even let you do a reimbursement request if that's not approved. But also remember that if your DMI is not completed and approved, that we're going to hold your money. We're not going to allow it to go out. And the reason for that is that the DMI contains mandatory federal information that we need to have. And if that's not in, then we can't give out federal money. It's as easy as that.
Can I add one thing? Those LEAs that have their monitoring visit after December 1st, No, the ones that go before, they would be able, if, as long as there are no findings, they would be able to start claiming their reimbursement requests, submitting reimbursement requests as soon as those two desktop tools are approved.
Right.
Those that have theirs after will have some amount retained in case there are any findings. So it's just protection, if that makes sense to you. So there is an advantage of going earlier than later.
It's also the case that, remember that we always do a fall adjustment. So you shouldn't be going to ask for all of your money to begin with, because in that fall adjustment, you may go up or down. You may stay the same, but you could go up or down. So just be aware of that. That doesn't make a change in a lot of them. All right, requests must be made by the 25th of the month to guarantee that you will get it the next month. Now, I know that they've been giving you timelines and said, I think this one is the 12th, Monday is the limit. But the sooner you can get it in, the better, because then if we ask for additional information, you've got time to resubmit it with the information we're asking for before the deadline. If you do it right on the deadline or 3 or 4 days before the deadline, chances are if we send it back, you're not going to have time to get it back in order to get it paid on that month's allotment memo. And we're also told by finance, as they go into it, they look at the date you submitted it. If that day is 1 day over what they tell you the limit is, they will hold that down in finance for the next month. They will not pay it. So kind of be aware of that. That's a new thing that they've started down there. And even if we approve it by the correct date that we need to approve it, if it's beyond the date that they said is the limit, they're not going to pay it till the next month. So just be aware that if you get your memo and it doesn't show that you're getting your Title I reimbursement, that's why. It was entered after the date, or we sent it back for information and you didn't get it back in time to meet the deadline. So just kind of be aware that the sooner you can get that in, and that we have time to look at it and know whether or not you've got to add additional information or not. Okay, so the sooner, 25th of the month before, is the best bet. Okay, now, there are 2 reimbursement requests that we really need to have. Number 1 is your June 30th request that takes all of your information, because they use that for state reporting. They tell the state how much federal money we've used, how much state money we've used, all of that kind of stuff. The other one that's necessary is September 30th. So you need to be able to say, okay, here's my expenses up to September 30th, and that's for our federal reports. So we need to have that for federal. Questions? Okay, so we have attached, I don't know if any of you have looked at the UCA. In the UCA, we have a very small, short risk analysis kind of thing. And it looks at things like, how much money are you getting? How long has your Title I director been in existence? Are you changing them every year? What are you doing with that? How long has your BA been there? Did you get all of your things in on time? So were your assurances in by July 1? Did you complete your Utah grants by November 1st? And did you complete your DMI by December 1st? All of those kinds of things. Did you have any findings on your audit, whether you had a single audit or a fiscal audit? Did you have any kind of findings? If so, did you take care of them? Were they fixed? We're also looking at if you had an on-site visit and your on-site visit said you needed to fix these things, did you get them fixed? All of those kinds of things are going into that risk assessment. So based on that risk assessment and what information you give us, then that will give you a risk number. And based on that, we'll know whether you're a high-risk district or a low-risk district. And if you're high risk, then we may come in to visit you more often. Okay? The other thing is that your assurances are due on July 1. If for some reason you didn't get that assurances back to us until, let's say, August 10th, that means when I or Tammy looks at your first reimbursement for that year's funds, so this would be for 20 funds, that we cannot give you any payment from July 1 to August 10th because none of those then would be approved because the August 10th then would be your official start date instead of July 1. So just kind of be aware of that you need to get that in.
Tammy, would you just mention who can respond to that assurances document because they can't respond?
No, it has to be your superintendent or your charter leader. They're the ones that have to do that assurance. They may help you help them do it, but they're the ones that have to have their name on the dotted line. Okay? Questions? All right, you know that we can't give you a reimbursement on 20 money till you've spent all of your 18, 19 money, so on. Also remember, I can't remember if we put this in there. Those we talked about. Those. One of the things that you have to remember with Title I is that you have a carryover limit. So if you got, let's say, last year's money, FY19, and you want to carry some of that over into 20, fiscal year 20, you can only carry over 15% of that money. So if you take 15% of your allocation, that tells you how much money you can carry over into the next year. Now, the Tidings Amendment says that you can apply for a waiver once every 3 years. That waiver request goes to Becky. She has to approve it. She will send you a letter saying, yes, I approve this, or no, I don't. Tammy and I keep a list of who has requested waivers, which were granted, and we will look to see if you're even eligible for that. Now, if you don't apply for a waiver and you want to carry over more than 15%, you will lose anything over the 15%. That will be taken back because you are not allowed to carry over more than 15% of your money. Okay, so be aware of that. That's why you need to get those reimbursement requests in so that you use your money. Questions? Oh, this is the killer one. This is time and effort documentation. All right, anytime you have federal money and you are spending it on personnel, you must do time and effort documentation. Okay? So for Title I, this says that you look at how your people are being paid. If they're being paid with Title I money, 100% or just partially. So there's two types. So, cost objectives. Now, I know last year when we talked about this, we said that they were telling us that if you were doing the same purpose, that would count as 100%, like you were doing tutoring for Title I and IDA. Well, they're telling us this year you can't. If they're being paid out of a different fund, then it needs to be recorded separately. Sorry about that. So if you're tutoring and they're doing it for Title I, they're doing it for state money, they're doing it for IDA, all of those have to be listed separately. And the total amount on that PARS report has to show 100% of their time and effort, or 100% of their allowable hours. Okay? Questions? And that's whether they're paid with state or federal money. As long as they've got any federal money, you have to do a time and effort report. Okay, so you can either do them monthly or you can do them semi-annually. You must have somewhere in your organization a written policy for time and effort. And as we go out on monitoring this year, we're going to start looking for those written. That you've got some way to tell us how you're collecting those kinds of things. All right. If you're doing multiple programs, then you need to do these monthly. Okay? Has to have the name of the employee, the name of the LEA or the school, or the school. Okay? Who are they working for? What's their job title or their job description? Are you doing it by FTA, percentages, hours? How are you doing that? They must have a dated employee signature and a dated supervisor signature. And these need to be after the fact. Okay? So if you're doing it a month and you need to begin with certification things, so you can go over months. You can say, we start school on August 22nd, so my PARS is going to go from August 22nd to September 22nd, and you tell me what year you're doing this for. Okay, but it needs to be the month, it needs to be the days, and it needs to be the year. You've got to tell me what federal program you're working on. This one is 100%. So 100% is every 6 months. So that's nice. That's easy. But all I have to have a statement on there says, I approve, I certify, I whatever, that I have spent 100% of my time and effort on this program. Okay? 100%. 6 months. So you do it twice a year, which is nice. Okay, so multiple ones. Let's look at that. Same thing to begin with. Name of the person, name of the school, name of the district, job title, job description, number of hours worked, can work instead of percentages, same certifications, dates and years. You've got to show then 100% of their time and effort. So did they work 20% in Title I, 50% in state money, 30% in IDA, whatever those things are. Could be Title I, could be Title III, could be Title II, whatever that is. And again, the dated signatures. Now the one caveat that we've got is that if your multiple program person is on a fixed schedule, that means they do the same thing on every day, like the same thing every Monday, the same thing every Tuesday of the week. Now, it may be different, Monday and Tuesday may be different, but every Tuesday of the month, they do the same thing. And you attach that schedule, then they can do the certification for as long as that schedule is in place, but not more than 6 months. Okay? So let's say that you run on a quarter basis. So every quarter, you have to do a new time and effort document because then their permanent schedule changes. Okay? If you do the same schedule for the whole year, you still have to do it every 6 months. So there has to be at least 2 every time. Question? Problems? No? When we asked for the DMI, we asked you for a blank copy of the form you're going to use, just so we can make sure all the details are there. I don't want signed copies. I don't want everybody in the world's copy of their time and effort. All I want is a blank copy of what you're going to use. Okay? Now, we also have provisions that if you have a time clock method of doing time and effort, we can use that if you show us how that is approved by the employee and how it's approved by the supervisor. Okay. It should not be signed by the secretary at the front desk. Okay. Questions? No?
So we're collecting these, but we're not turning them in.
Right.
We just have them.
We will look at them on an on-site visit. We will ask you to produce those. On a reimbursement request, we may ask you to send at least 1 in for every employee that is being paid out of that money. So you just need to have them on hand. Auditors may ask to look at them, and they should match somehow with how you're documenting pay. Yes?
What's the retention?
I think retention for federal information is 5 years.
And Sandy, I think Tammy started asking for time and effort for those schools that are on the monitoring.
Right.
Electronically. So she would have those in advance to match up with. So that kind of stuff happens in the desktop way rather than the on-site way.
Right. But if you don't send them in ahead of time, we will ask you for them. All right, so now you need to have sufficient controls. That's why you need that policy that ensures those things get done, that they happen. That's the alternative method that we talked about. What the schedule should look like. And we talked about the carryover money. Now, with the carryover money, that is based on the September 30th reimbursement request. So this year's carryover, you must have submitted a request that goes up to and including September 30th. It needs to be in by October 25th. Okay? That's when we decide whether or not you've got more than 15% carryover. If you don't have one in by that date, then you automatically have the 15% carryover into the next period. All right, so letters have to be to Becky by November 1st. That's why we want you to look at that October date of getting that in so you know what your carryover is going to be ahead of time. If your funds are less, if you receive less than $50,000 in Title I funds, then you can carry over more than 15% without a waiver if you've turned in a September 30th reimbursement request. Okay? Questions? And we do maintain a list of who've had waivers and who hasn't had waivers. You're up, Becky. If you have any questions, feel free to call, ask. Oh, here's this one.
To wrap up, Candy mentioned the carryover letter. There's an example in the handbook. So this is here, it's also posted on the website. Val showed you a screenshot of what the website looks like. Periodically, we update this and we'll always make sure that the most updated version is posted on the website. We have a couple of sign-up sheets. If you would like to have some individual questions answered, this one is, if you would like to meet with our staff here, that's the yellow one. If you would like us to come, I don't have my glasses on. If you would like us to come on site to your LEA and meet with you, we're happy to do that as well. And we've done that on a number of occasions. Sandy and I have gone out and traveled out to LEAs and met with them for several hours, just one-on-one. So these two signups here. So if you want to meet with us here, we're happy to do that. If you'd like us to come to your LEA and meet with you and maybe with some of your other staff, we're happy to do that. But please don't ever hesitate to reach out. Sandy has great expertise with Title I. She's been doing it for a long time, so you're still feel free. You can always ask Sandy questions. You can ask Tammy, you can reach out to me or to Val. If you have questions about school improvement, Max and Leslie are always right there ready to answer those questions. We're always happy to help you in any way that we can. Do you have any questions right now that we can answer? Okay, I just want to thank you. We're right on the nose for ending. This is all of our contact information for all of the programs. You can, like I said, reach us. Our email addresses are always our first name dot last name at schools.utah.gov. Those are all of our phone numbers there and the programs that Again, thank you for being here. We appreciate the opportunity to work with all of you, and we're grateful for the work that you do every day for the kids. So important. So have a wonderful rest of the afternoon. Those of you that have traveled for a distance, I wish you safe travels on the way back. I know there were some road closures here and there because of storms and mudslides. I hope you're all safe and able to get through. Thank you.
No, it's not. Okay, I have a question because preschool just came to me and said, okay, we received a school grant. It includes the TANF funds, that special grant.
Wales?
It was the thought.
That's right. See you.
They have that set up, it's, half